Gun violence and a hate crime combined to take 10 innocent lives in New York. President Biden pays his respects in the city of Buffalo while authorities confirm the attack was racially motivated. What inspired the shooter, and will killings like this become more common? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is The Newsmakers. We're not even halfway through 2022, and there have already been around 200 mass shootings in the United States. In recent years, the motivation for many of these murders appears to be race. On Saturday, a gunman walked into a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, and opened fire. By the time he was apprehended, 10 people were dead, 3 more wounded, and almost all were black.
The evidence that we have uncovered so far makes no mistake that this is an absolute racist hate crime. It will be prosecuted as a hate crime. This is someone who has hate in their heart, soul, and mind, and there is no mistake that that's the direction that this is going in.
A few days after the shooting, President Biden visited the grief-stricken city to pay his respects. While speaking to a crowd of mourners, he condemned the attack and denounced white supremacy as a poison plaguing the country.
What happened here is simple and straightforward: terrorism. Terrorism, domestic terrorism, violence inflicted in the service of hate and the vicious thirst for power that defines one group of people being inherently inferior to any other group. Evil will not win, I promise you. Hate will not prevail, and white supremacy will not have the last word.
But what drives someone to commit such a heinous crime? Well, the main suspect is 18-year-old Peyton Gendron. The teenager is reported to have written a 180-page manifesto bemoaning the dwindling size of the white population. It's often referred to as the Great Replacement theory, and while the ideology is a fringe one, it has been creeping its way into the mainstream.
The left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. In other words, you're being replaced and there's nothing you can do about it. So shut up! Political terms, this policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries. They brag about it all the time, but if you dare to say it's happening, they will scream at you with maximum hysteria.
You kind of need to be replaced, or at least canceled out, by new voters who will be more compliant when new climate change or pandemic restrictions are enacted. Because they need you silenced, ostracized, demoralized, as they import new voters to offset and eventually replace all you old people, you traditionalists, all of you guys who know your history still. They not want you replaced, and they want cheap labor. And so far, things are going according to plan.
Several gunmen have cited the theory in recent years. In 2018, 11 people were killed while worshiping at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. The alleged attacker, Robert Bowers, had taken to social media to blame a Jewish group for, quote, bringing invaders in that kill our people. He also had a history of spouting anti-Semitic slurs online. The following year, a white male gunned down 23 people in a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. The suspected shooter, Patrick Cruzius, reportedly posted a 4-page hate-filled manifesto on the far-right forum 8chan. The document talked about a Hispanic invasion of Texas and laid out plans to separate the U.S. into territories by race. The New York State's top prosecutor has launched an investigation into the role social media may have played in Saturday's shooting. 22 people saw the attack live online, but millions more were able to watch once it was done. And New York's governor says tech firms must share some blame for the attack.
We'll be aggressive in our pursuit of anyone who subscribes to the ideals professed by other white supremacists, and how there's a feeding frenzy on social media platforms where hate festers more hate. That has to stop. These outlets must be more vigilant in monitoring social media content. And certainly, the fact that this act of barbarism, this execution of innocent human beings could be live streamed on social media platforms and not taken down within a second, says to me that there is a responsibility out there, and we're going to continue to work on this and make sure that those who provide these platforms have a moral and ethical, and I hope to have a legal responsibility to ensure that such hate cannot populate these sites. Because this is the result when you have individuals who use these platforms and talk to others who share these demented views.
So as these demented views persist and hate spreads online, more and more innocent lives are at risk. Joining me now to look further at what happened in the Buffalo shooting is a member of Buffalo's community, Reverend Julian Armand Cook, is the pastor of the Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church, and he joins us now from Buffalo. Thanks so much for being with us. We've had a few days now to digest this. I'm sure you're still in shock, but how do you assess what happened on Saturday in this context of rampant gun violence and hate crime in the United States?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. As I interpret and read this incredibly hateful and vile racist act, I read it as a part of a historic trajectory that has existed here in the United States, but not just in the United States, but globally. It has persisted here in the United States with incredible intensity, and that is this legacy of white supremacy and the violence that white supremacy begets. This does not come out of a historical vacuum. This 18-year-old young man, if I use that term, in many respects was fed and feasted sumptuously and daily from a diet of hatred, from a storied and long diet of hatred. That is what is behind this vile act. So when I read this, I cannot read this as one act. I have to read this act as a part of a longer historical trajectory in order to really understand what happened here.
And this so-called white replacement theory, it's all part of what you're talking about, correct?
Absolutely. And in the United States, that theory is being promulgated not just by, there's this notion that these are some sort of backwoods, that this is a fringe movement. No, this has reached deeply into conservative spaces, into the Republican Party. There are representatives and politicians who themselves ascribe to this theory. It is broadcast daily on some of the conservative news media. So this replacement theory and ideology is a regular part of life here, and it grows out of that. It is not a fringe movement. There is a mass movement that ascribes to this.
We're seeing pictures right now of Tucker Carlson off of Fox News, who actually says that, he's turning this into something of a political strategy. He says, Democrats are deliberately trying to replace legacy Americans, as he calls them, with more obedient people from faraway countries in order to gain votes. What does that even really mean? Who are these legacy Americans that he thinks have more of a right to be there than anyone else?
Well, it's a part of a white supremacist ideology, right? The legacy Americans are those who have held power for forever, which happen to be white men, whereas those of us who come from other racial backgrounds, but in my case, as an African American, have been in this country because we were brought here, we are not considered legacy Americans. As a matter of fact, we are lucky to be here in Mr. Carlson's mind. So we need to, absolutely. This is a part of that white supremacist ideology. And we must resist that ideology. We must speak against it, but we can no longer hide it as well. That's very important. Because when we hide it and suppress it, things like what happened on Saturday happen.
Right. So what will you do now to help your community heal and to feel safe again? And what help does your community also need from outside to get there?
I think number one, we have to address some of the economic realities that have also been at play here, right? White supremacy doesn't just show up when a gunman enters a grocery store. White supremacy and racism, economic alienation, and neglect were much a part of Buffalo long before this gunman showed up. He is the latest manifestation in a long history of racism active in Buffalo's community. It's a great community, but there is racism here, right? The fact that this was the only grocery store for a 2-mile radius, that this is a food desert, that so many African American people have to go to this grocery store because they have no other to get what they need from. That's a part of that story. We must demand, number one, that there are other grocery options, that there are other food security options in this community. We must demand that these gun laws be changed. There's no reason that someone should be able to get access to a weapon of mass destruction of that kind. And we must also demand that we be honest about what's happening in this movement against a so-called critical race theory and against dialogues about the true history of this country. We must be adamant. We must be adamant and vigorous in our determination to continue to tell the truth and to never, ever go back. We will not forget. And that's what's important at this moment.
Reverend Cook, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us on the Newsmakers. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
So let's broaden out the discussion now and welcome 3 new guests. Kelechi Egwim is in Washington. He is the executive director of the Black empowerment organization Appeal. Joseph Haynes Davis joins us from Orlando, Florida. He is a lawyer and criminal justice expert. And in Dayton, Ohio, is Vernellia Randall, an emeritus law professor at the University of Dayton and author of Dying While Black. Thanks all so much for being with us. Kelechi, I'll start with you. What do you wish had been done to prevent this shooting, or could anything really have prevented it, given this suspect had this mission apparently set in his mind, and he had a gun to do it with?
Well, clearly a lot could have been done for this specific one. It's hard for me to really narrow it down to the specifics of this incident because a lot was done to set it up. A lot was done to create the community that was essentially an island that only had one grocery store. A lot was done to get to that point where he was able to identify this very, very vulnerable specific target. So the target could have not been created by the government in the first place. But in terms of him personally, I mean, obviously there were lots of warnings. I mean, he threatened, I think it's his high school, I think a year ago, and they evaluated him and said, "Oh, he's good. Send him back home." He was projecting what he was going to do on social media, the plan. He even identified Tops by name on social media before he actually went out. Of course, he live streamed. So he was projecting as much as possible what he was going to do, and apparently nobody cared. I mean, ultimately nobody cared. If this was a black person projecting, in the same way about doing a shooting in a predominantly white neighborhood, especially a prosperous one, it would be a very different response.
And what about, Kelechi, if you can quickly address this white replacement theory that we've been hearing so much about in the wake of this shooting? It's sometimes in right-wing media actually presented rather as an immigration problem. That's what white replacement is, an immigration problem that just needs to be addressed through policy.
Yeah, that's very funny. This country has been afraid of white replacement since they realized that they brought too many black people from Africa. Right after slavery, when Africans were freed from chattel slavery in America, and they began to build their own communities and began to grow, this issue came up, and that's why the Ku Klux Klan was created, to curb black people from being able to replace white workers, to be able to not be able to replace white power in this country. So it's not a new thing. It's really the basis of Jim Crow was for black people not to replace white people in the economy and the power structure. Reconstruction was undermined by this theory of replacement. They didn't want black people replacing white people in politics and in government. So this is not a new thing.
Right.
We act like it's new, but it's been around almost as long as this country's been around.
And now it's spread
Exactly.
to Latino immigration. Yeah, Professor Randall, I did want to get to you immediately. I could see you agree very much with what you just heard. But how much do you think this tragedy, if you could include this as well, how much is this tragedy an issue of racially motivated crime versus actual gun violence, or is it a lethal combination of both?
It's both. I mean, the racially motivated crime would have happened even if there was a control of guns.
Mm.
The fact that people had guns mean that they were in fact more killings, but we've had bombings. People have used all kind of weapons in terms of in racially motivated crimes, and the replacement theory is as old as this country. In 1790, just a few years after the Constitution was approved, the very first immigration law was passed and said, I'm not saying basically said, it in fact said only free white people could immigrate. And there's a whole line of cases of people trying to say, look, I got denied immigration because I'm not white, but really, I am white. The replacement theory has been imposed in every non-Anglo-Saxon group that immigrated: Italian, Irish, German, and it just keeps popping up. And the whole issue of slavery has made, I mean, the whole issue of us getting slavery ending, the whole replacement theory has been used continuously in communities and states where the Black, Latino population seem to be growing faster than the white population.
Professor Randall, can I ask you as well, though, quickly? I mean, what role you think in all of this social media is actually playing, and the lightning speed with which these ideas, and as old as they may be, can now be perpetuated more quickly and more effectively online. And do you think social media companies or the government or the police should be more responsible for what happens online in order to police it better and maybe prevent events like this?
Well, the thing is, I don't believe in that there's a way to prevent it. I just don't. I think there's a way you can prevent a particular one, maybe, but that in fact, given the level of hatred and violence in this country and the refusal to control guns, just means someone else will do it. Social media has a role because, in fact, my dad was threatened in 1950 when I was 14 years old. My dad was threatened with a gun in his face by a white man because my dad said to his wife, "Honey, give me a pack of Pall Mall." So the whole idea of white violence it's a continuous stream. It's just social media. My oldest son likes to say what social media does is it used to be that the crank in a few cranks in every town has a few cranks, a few overt, outrageous racists, and they will do what they want in that town.
Okay.
But what media has done is allowed them to come together and have a much bigger group.
Okay, Joseph Haynes Davis, I want to get to you because you have said that you think the right to bear arms actually helps America. When you see shootings like this taking so many innocent lives, though, I fail to understand how you reckon that, because especially when we see people additionally motivated by hate, how do you reconcile the right to bear arms with keeping Americans safer?
Well, as always, thank you for having me. And respectfully, we are both from the same state, the great state of Illinois, but we don't have to agree at all. And I mean that with the utmost respect to you. Fact of the matter is, the Second Amendment is part of the Constitution. Fact of the matter is, the Second Amendment can be used correctly in self-defense of matters like this. For instance, if a avowed white supremacist tries to attack me or my family or the people that I love, I have the right to keep and bear arms and respond with lethal, deadly force in self-defense. I will, like the good professor, law professor, mentioned her background. I will give you an instance in southern St. Clair County, here in United States, St. Clair County, Illinois. My mother and father, the late Dr. Miles Dewey Davis, my mother, the late Josephine Haynes Davis, bought a 160-acre farm in 1947. And they were the biggest landowners, not only in the county, but in southern Illinois. It was a 100% German-American immigrant enclave. And violence came to their doorstep because the bigots didn't like them there. My mother and father didn't respond with calling the police. They responded with lethal, deadly force, shooting at them, and then by some social miracle, everyone became
I
friends.
understand. I do understand that there is a case for the specific protection in a case that you're citing there. But let me ask these: in cases where a gunman enters a busy premise like the Top supermarket, the best case scenario is that only 2 people will die in front of innocent witnesses. The gunman will have to shoot someone first to justify being shot and killed. In the case of the Texas church shooting in 2019, a gunman killed 2 people before someone was able to shoot him, and that shooter refused to be hailed as a hero. He suffered massive trauma for having taken a life, not to mention the psychological trauma of those who survived to witness that shooting. How is owning guns today, with the circumstances of not just protecting a piece of land, but mass shootings, how is owning guns an answer?
Well, first of all, let me just jump in.
Hold on, let me let Joseph David Haynes.
If I may respond without being interrupted, because I didn't interrupt anyone on this panel. Now, your question asked about a constitutional right to keep and bear arms for Americans. There is absolutely no way to defend against an ambush. In fact, the only way to get out of an ambush is to fight your way out of an ambush. So what your question respectfully seems to ask is whether or not there would be a constitutional justification for the repeal of the Second Amendment and government-sponsored gun confiscation. That's what it seems to imply. And if that is the case, if I may, I did not. You are.
Okay, one more minute, Professor, and I'll come to you.
I'm trying to respond. The fact of the matter is, gun confiscation by the government will never happen, and I believe it shouldn't happen. You do not have to agree with me, but we don't have to be agreeable. We are having a discussion here, not an argument. So that is my answer.
Well, we're having an argument too, because you're misrepresenting the Second Amendment.
I'm not misrepresenting anything. I'm giving my
opinion. I'll allow the professor to reply quickly. Professor, go ahead.
You said that the Second Amendment gives the right to bear arms within the context of a well-regulated militia, and that we can regulate what kind of guns are on the street, how many bullets can be in those guns, who can own those guns. We can regulate, we can say whether or not a person with no mental health problems can have a gun. We could regulate, if we wanted to, the age component. We do it in a lot of areas. So the Second Amendment, I agree with you. We're not going to get rid of the Second Amendment, but we could focus on the well-regulated part of it and make that much more significant. Right now, we have adopted we can't do anything. Everybody has a right to bear arms, whatever arms they want. And I think that's just false.
If I may respond when she's finished, because the fact of the matter is, the state of New York has the strictest gun laws in the nation. This still happened. And the fact of the matter is, within the 10th Amendment, that allows for the various states to regulate the way they want to. So New York is stronger, arguably, than, let's say, Georgia or my great state of Florida. I am a proud gun owner. And I am a proud gun owner because it is my constitutional right. And I'm going to embrace every constitutional right as a Black American male in this great country every day. And I'm embracing it because it is my right. And I'm embracing it for self-defense against matters like this. If white supremacy is part of the environment in this country, then I am going to be prepared to defend myself every single day I walk out of my house.
Okay, Joseph Haynes Davis, I'm going to have to give you the last word and apologize sincerely to Kelechi for not being able to come back to you. We are completely out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists truly so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.